The good thing is it's Friday, so
Yeah,
we're towards the end of it. I'm going to sleep in tomorrow, so that's always good.
that's always a
Uh,
beautiful thing.
yeah, but besides that, there was I've been seeing in the news, and I'm thinking, well, actually, you suggested this. People are probably thinking as well. What is about this Microsoft getting rid of passwords?
That's crazy. I don't get it. I don't understand how that would work. I guess some people, and to some extent, you've talked about that sometimes the whole password thing can be a little bit flawed. And
Yeah.
I guess Microsoft might think that, and maybe you can kind of expand on that. That's kind of weird to me.
Passwords are inherently insecure. That's what all the ransomware guys bet on, is that they can weasel their way in and get your password. And once they have your password, they can do whatever they want. So historically, passwords, they're just not a good medium to secure stuff with, just because people can fall for some of the scammer tricks, and they think they're secure because they have a password. But if somebody else has that password or can guess that password, it's easy access for them. So to prevent that, historically, what companies have been doing is they've been changing passwords, expiring passwords after a certain amount of time. So you force users to change their passwords. Well, the problem with that is that when users are forced to change their password, they will have two passwords that they'll cycle between the two, right? So then companies started getting smarter to that idea. So they were like, okay, we're going to remember last 30, 10 or 30, whatever the number is, passwords, so that the user cannot change it to one of the last 10 or 30 or whatever passwords that they use. Well, the problem with that is people start running out of ideas to use for a password. So then they start writing them down. Well, that's even worse, because I've seen, passwords on sticky notes are stuck to the monitor. That's the worst way to, keep your password safe. So historically, passwords have been a problem, and the only way to get rid of it is that you have some alternate sort of authentication. Whether it's biometric, whether it's some kind of an app on your phone, or a USB device, or a key, or like YubiKey or something like that, where it will create a PIN code for you that you have to use instead of your password, and that PIN code expires really quick. So, within a few seconds it will expire. So even if somebody steals that PIN, it's no good after a few seconds.
Yeah.
So that's a very secure way of going about it, right? So, and that's where Microsoft is coming in and saying, okay, we are going to give users an avenue of not having to use password, because that's what is causing a lot of these breaches is passwords. Passwords get compromised and people get breached. That's just how it works. So that's one side of the equation, is, it is, passwords historically have been an avenue of breach. So now Microsoft is giving us that option to not use a password, have biometric or token authentication. And that kind of rides in with what Microsoft has been doing, because remember, Microsoft Surface machines have biometric authentication, right? And it works well. It does. Like, you open up your laptop or your Surface Book, it authenticates your face, and boom, you're in. You don't have to type in anything. It's secure. Nobody's going to steal your face. Well, if somebody steals your face, you've got bigger problems, right?
Yeah, bigger issues.
So the thing is, that is a secure way of logging people in, authenticating people, without having to have them remember passwords that can be stolen. Now, of course, if your device does not support biometric authentication, if it doesn't have the hardware for it, you can always use Microsoft's Authenticator app, which ties in with Azure AD. And keep in mind, Azure AD, that's the authenticator for Microsoft 365. So all of a sudden now, since we have Azure AD, we can have machines log into Azure AD and use the Microsoft Authenticator app to log in. And the way it'll work is when you're ready to log in, you just type in the PIN from your Authenticator app, and that PIN will expire after a few seconds. So even if somebody steals your PIN, it's only good for a few seconds, and that's it. It's done. So that's the thing. You want to have some sort of authentication that is more than just a password that stays there for 30, 40, 50 days, or that you end up writing down because you don't want to forget it. So that's where this is going for, and it's been proven. I mean, there's been a lot of studies around this. The best way to authenticate is to not use a password. Use alternate means of authentication, which might be biometric or token or whatever it is, not a password. Because when you have a password, you're relying heavily on the weakest link in the chain, and that's the human. I mean, including myself. Machines don't make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. So that alternate way of authentication is what Microsoft is now bringing to the table for all kinds of machines. Now, of course, in Windows 11, it's going to be even easier. The login to Azure AD. You may have noticed, we started seeing this, when Windows 10 first came out. It became harder and harder to not join Windows machines to Azure AD. I mean, you onboard a new machine, and the first thing it wants to do is wants you to type in your Microsoft or Office 365 email address. Yeah. And to create a local account like traditional machines used to do, to create a local account, you want to make sure your machine is not connected to a network, so it cannot sense Microsoft 365 or Azure AD out there over the internet. And then it won't prompt you for the cloud-based authentication. It will let you create a local username and password to log in. That's getting harder, right? So the goal is that Microsoft wants to get rid of passwords altogether. It'll be either, number one, it'll be biometric authentication, which is built into pretty much all the Microsoft devices. Or if that is not an option, then you use a token or a PIN code from your Authenticator app, which, nowadays pretty much everybody has a smartphone, so you have your Authenticator app right there. And by the way, Authenticator app is a free app you can just download. So
I didn't even know
there's
that.
no
Wow.
cost to it. Yeah, just install it. Now, of course, in the IT field, we've been using the Authenticator app for, years and years. The multi-factor authentication component comes in through the Authenticator app, unless you're using a third party like Passly or things like that. Now, having said all this is all well and good. But I know what some of you are asking, and that is, there's been instances where modern authentication fails and the second factor fails in Office. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, so with machines logging into Azure AD, that there has never been failures for machines that have been logging into Azure AD for that second factor. The failures have only been with Office authentication, and just there are two different components, right? So there's one that's the OS itself, the OS login, and then there was a second one which is the Office login. That's where the break was. But I have yet to come across a machine where it was logged into Azure AD and then one day it just wouldn't log into Azure AD unless it's infected with some malware or something that's changing packets that are coming in or going out. I haven't seen that happen. So I think the goal here is to get rid of passwords altogether. We're not there yet because there's still a lot of third parties out there that have to have passwords. So we're not there yet. There is a lot of single sign-on options. Pretty much every company out there has some sort of a single sign-on option where, for example, here would be, this would be a good ideal setup. All your third-party apps are connected to Azure AD, and then you authenticate with Azure AD, and now Azure AD knows it's verified your identity. It can do single sign-on with all these third-party apps. So basically, if you want to log into Dropbox, since you logged into Windows with your Azure AD biometric authentication, you open Dropbox, boom, it's already there. It's already logged in because Dropbox already trusts your identity because Azure AD has already verified you. So that's what single sign-on is all about. So we're getting there pretty quick.
But aren't we like, so you mentioned Passly, and that's kind of what I think Passly kind of does. I love Passly for that reason, is that uh, anything or it could be any program, application, whatever that you use can be added on a Passly. And once I log into Passly, it recognizes that, and I can get into all my apps without having to do all of that. Isn't that kind of what that is? With like Passly and other programs like that.
Yeah, so there are third-party applications like Passly that do the same thing. The question would be, why Passly? So we've had customers where they had access to free multi-factor authentication in Microsoft 365, but yet they want to use Passly because on some machines that multi-factor in Office fails. So like you've been using Outlook to connect to your email. One day you open Outlook and it just doesn't authenticate. It keeps asking you for your password. So to avoid that, people go with a third-party app like Passly, which bypasses that whole situation, that whole thing. So basically all your authentication happens with this third-party application. Now, here's where Passly really makes things a lot easier, even for IT admins like us. Take this scenario. Your users log in with local AD. Then your users open Outlook and they log into Office 365 because they're two different separate identities. Well, Passly can integrate both of them together. So when users authenticate with your local AD, that authentication actually happens with Passly, and Passly is federated with Office 365. So when a user logs in, they open Outlook, they're already trusted because Passly is in the middle. Passly is saying, oh, hey, by the way, I know this user for a fact is a trusted user, and this user has this mailbox over here, and I have connections to all this. So it's kind of like the go-between cop directing traffic and saying, hey, yeah, I know this guy, let him through. So, and for that, it makes life so much easier because now you don't have to implement systems to federate your AD with Office 365, and then of course that federation sometimes breaks because things happen. With Passly, we once it's done, it's done. There's no going back and messing with things. The other beauty of it is when a user wants to change their password, they change it in one place. Whether they do it in their AD or whether they do it in Passly, they change their password in one place, it gets changed everywhere. They don't have to worry about anything. Just change it in one. And it's good for admins because if a user is let go or if a user leaves the company, you just have to disable their account in one place. Whether you do it in AD or Passly, wherever you do it, that's it. They lose access to everything that's connected to that account. So one place to disable the password and boom, it's done. The other advantage is like onboarding users. So when you have to create a user, you create it in one place, it gets created everywhere. So it's a lot that you don't have to touch like 3-4 different things. You just touch one thing and boom, it's there. That just makes life easier for admins, users, everybody. And that's why some companies want to go with a third-party app like Passly.
And it's interesting, to see, I was thinking about this earlier, when we were talking at the very beginning. I said, well, it's not really strange because for a lot of the apps that I'm using, like we've talked about Authy quite a bit, and I think Authy is phenomenal. It's like they'll send you a notification like, hey, did you log in here? Or for those of us that deal in crypto, the Authy won't even send. If you're selling crypto and you decide you want to send somewhere else, you go through Authy. Authy like, hey, did you do this? And so it's definitely much more secure than just having, because like you said, I have to be real honest. I've run out of passwords. It's like sometimes it's like, hey, you need a password. I'm like, damn, I don't remember. It's like, hey, you've used this password already. We need this new password. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 45 now. It's getting a little bit harder to remember passwords for every application that I use. So the fact that, these third parties are applications are around where it's like, hey, put in this code so you can get into your application. For me, I love it. So that's what Microsoft is trying to do. More power to them, because I think it's needed. Eventually, it gets exhausting trying to remember everything.
Well, not only just remembering it, but also it's not as secure as we originally thought it was going to
That's
be.
true.
You
I
know,
remember you were talking about, um, man, about a year or two ago when we were talking about something similar, and at the time Microsoft was sending text messages to your phone in order for you to get into Microsoft 365, and you were like, eventually they're going to phase that out because there was proof of concept that doesn't work either. So it's funny that this comes up because you said that it wasn't as secure.
yeah, there was already a proof of concept, and this was a while back, but yeah, there was a proof of concept where SMS, getting your PIN code over SMS should be considered compromised, and that's not very hard for people to get that PIN. So and that's why NIST does not accept PIN codes over SMS. You have to have some sort of a app that generates the PIN for you. Because when you're sending SMS, the actual flow of information is occurring in clear text. Think of it as like you're sending the PIN code in an email, which is clear text. Anybody in the middle can see that email. It's the same thing, right? So yeah, and you will still, like, if you enable MFA right now in Office 365, Microsoft will still give you the option to get that PIN code over SMS, because there are people out there who don't have the authentication app installed on their smart devices. However, it is being phased out, and I think eventually we'll get to a point where everything is just biometric and we don't have to worry about it. Now, where does that leave applications? Like, I know some companies are still using QuickBooks. Where does it leave applications like that? There is no recourse. I mean, what are you going to do with QuickBooks? I mean, you still have to have passwords. And if you have any kind of credit card processing going on with QuickBooks, it will force you to change your password every so many days. And it will force you to not use a password you've already used before. Eventually, you will run out of passwords. I mean, and there is no way to integrate with a third-party password app or multi-factor app or anything like that. So I don't know what QuickBooks is going to do, what Intuit is going to do with that, but that's a problem waiting to happen.
I'm surprised that they don't integrate a Authy type of thing, because I remember way back in the days, when companies were starting to see that security was an issue, they had that key fob that would change numbers every 30 seconds or every minute or something like that, in order for you to get into your trading accounts, security accounts, or anything like that. So I'm actually kind of surprised that Intuit hasn't thought ahead, in that regard.
Yeah, and it may be because Intuit is kind of focused on the small business, and maybe it's not a big concern to them, but eventually they're going to have to do something. And it's not very hard to integrate with a third-party authentication app. I mean, they can do it if they wanted to, but I think why spend the money on developers when people are buying your software as it is?
That's true.
I think that's where Intuit is.
That's true. That's true.
But no, I think it's the days are numbered for passwords, and eventually we'll get to a point where we don't have to worry about passwords. We just look at a machine, or our thumbprint works as our biometric token, or our facial impression, but something like that where it's seamless, and eventually we'll get there. But for right now, we still have a lot of passwords, and that's why we have password managers. The one bad thing about password managers is the bad guys only have to break into one thing, and they have access to the kingdom.
That's true. And it just seems like these bad guys are working overtime to see that happen. So
Yeah. Yeah, and so along with that, there's some good things that are coming out as well. So we're seeing more and more ethical hackers as well, to where
Yeah.
they will do like a proof of concept hack, and they will try to move horizontally in an organization, just to show them how weak their systems are. So those kind of things are always good. But we're still at such an early stage that there is, and while we're talking about this, guys, if you don't have a written, practiced security incident response plan, put one together.
Yeah.
And if you want us to do a video on how to come up with this checklist for an incident response plan, send us some feedback. We'll spend 30 minutes and we'll go through a checklist that you need to have on what to do. It is so important that everybody in the organization knows what to do and does not end up getting rid of that forensic evidence that's going to help your cyber insurance provider to pay out. You don't want to do that, because, I mean, why have cyber insurance if you're not going to see the payout for it? And I've seen it so many times where people will try to fix things or clean up things, and then in the process, now they've lost the evidence of the attack, and there's nothing showing that there was an attack. Now, one of the other things that's happening recently, let's say you got hit by ransomware, and let's say you decided that you're going to pay the ransom for whatever reason. Let's say you're going to pay the ransom. Well, what we're seeing is that the bad guys, the hackers, they will ask for a ransom, and if you agree to that ransom quickly, they will ask for additional money.
Really?
So they're coming back, and so let's say they said it's going to be $200,000, and if you agree to it, they're going to say, oh well, no, we need 25,000 more. They want to milk every last drop they can.
Good Lord.
So they're actually now, it's almost like they're negotiating. Oh well, can you go higher? It's like, come on. And guys, for companies who are thinking about that, if you do get compromised, that you're going to pay the ransom, keep this in mind. Paying the ransom doesn't mean you get access to your data immediately.
That's true.
Will still take days to decrypt that data. So it will take days to get the encryption keys. It will take days to decrypt that data. So it's not something that you want to rely on when everything is come to a screeching halt. You want to make sure you have good backups. Backups need to be on alternate VLANs, on alternate networks. So if your primary network gets compromised, that infection does not flow over into your backup systems as well. So you want to make sure they're on separate networks, whether you have them VLANed out with logically different networks, or whether you have two physical separate networks. And in your incident response plan, you need to have systems in place, like if an infection is detected, that you can very quickly disconnect machines from the network and the internet and things like that. So it's a lot to think about, but if there's enough demand from people about this, we can do another video about that.
We should. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think with that, Mac, we'll call it a day. It's been a long week, and
Yes.
hopefully it'll be a great weekend.